Hi guys! This is a pop culture Kleffnotes all about the most recent episode of Houdini and Doyle called Spring-Heeled Jack. Now, if you haven't guessed, the title references a specific figure from actual London history named Spring-Heeled Jack. So, while Houdini and Doyle is set in 1901, the figure Spring-Heeled Jack he got a bit of a history in the episode from Doyle. So in that history we learn that in 1837 there was an appearance of this figure who was terrifying people and could leap very high, thus the spring heels. So that's what we've got. He made some later appearances in history closer to 1901. The last reported case that I found when I was looking it up was like 1904. But the interesting part, there are things that didn't get discussed in the episode. I mean, it's a TV show. They're not going to go super into detail about the history of a figure just for the sake of referencing it to the audience. So I thought I would give you a slightly more in-depth history of Spring-Heeled Jack in case you were interested after this episode. So the figure Spring-Heeled Jack actually had a sort of predecessor figure. In the even earlier 19th century, there were ghosts. There was this idea that there were ghosts in London that were preying on lone pedestrians, so anyone who's traveling alone at night could be attacked. And even in 1803, 1804, there was a figure called the Hammersmith Ghost that had similar, scares people, is a thing that wanders through the night, and then again was seen in 1824. So there were these predecessors in, the London area that would prey on people. So there was an idea that there were, dark and creepy things happening at night. So in 1837, a woman named Mary Stevens was leapt upon by a man, and she was grabbed, she screamed. It ran away when she screamed, so there wasn't a lot of, detail. And then the next day, another person who lived near where she did was also attacked. In all of these cases, it's always women in these cases. Now in Houdini and Doyle, men were being attacked. But in the record, the bigger cases all had to do with women. So in January 9th of 1838, the story of Spring-Heeled Jack became more official. It was sort of like a rumored, kind of if you're writing a paper, it would be the sort of thing that would be in the sort of scandal column, ooh, Spring-Heeled Jack, gasp. But January 9th, 1838, a resident of Peckham wrote a letter that stated that they thought there were a group of people who were working on a dare or some sort of there's a hint that they thought it was upper classy people who were trying to mess with the lower class sort of. So they thought that there was someone pranking the city who was taking on a guise. In this Spring-Heeled Jack, besides the fact that there was a man in a cloak, there was sometimes often a reference to a person in a bear skin. So someone wandering around with a bear skin on them was scaring people, which, I mean, that would be really creepy at night, a person size. I mean, bears are really tall, but you're in London, you're not expecting anything bear shaped to pop out at you. So that would creep me out just as much as a man in a really big cloak attacking me. So the biggest, most well-known stories from the Spring-Heeled Jack history are Jane Alsop, who on February 19th, 1838, she answered the door to her father's home, and a man was there and said that he was a policeman and they'd cornered Spring-Heeled Jack, but he needed a light. So she was giving him the light, she sort of followed him outside, then he proceeded to attack her and tear at her dress. She screamed and she was rescued. Then, February 28th, 1838, Lucy Scales was with her sister and walking through the night, and I should point out, they're just sisters, walking, they were meeting their brother. The issue is that in a lot of London pop culture stories, it's there were women walking and they were prostitutes. And I mean, this guy's name is Jack, so I feel the conclusion would be yeah, prostitutes, because the guy's name is Jack, Jack the Ripper. Well, you'll see. Just hold on. So there was a big media frenzy because these were more salacious stories. There was more meat to them, so they could focus on more details. Once these stories came out, there was a big media frenzy. So a lot like what happened in Houdini and Doyle, because this is a story of well, there's no murder. There's mayhem and madness, and people were having fits and freaking out and thinking they were going to be attacked. So there was a lot of push in the popular media. While the papers were discussing it, it sort of died down at a certain point, but then Then Spring Heel Jack continued to appear in Penny Dreadfuls, which I know is the name of a television show, but it was also a sort of scandalized press, so they talked more about like murder and like details of like crazy magic things and stuff like that. Sort of like, I almost said graphic novels and that's not right. Sort of like cheap paperbacks. So if you wanted something like that would scare you, be sort of like unseemly, that's what you would read. Spring Heel Jack also started appearing in cheap theater productions, Punch and Judy shows. He became sort of a popular fictional character, just in general. What's interesting is because Spring Heel Jack only attacked women, there is sort of a connection to Jack the Ripper. They're not officially connected. Jack the Ripper occurred about 50 years after these events, so not technically Jack the Ripper, but it is interesting that it's the same name and that Jack the Ripper is frequently depicted with this giant like cloak that like disguises him. And in some theories about Jack the Ripper, there is the idea that it's an upper class man who's killing young women of the lower class, because the women being attacked weren't, I mean, there's no big discussion about like their rank in society, but the fact that they're sort of like walking around alone, they're not police women, walking around alone by herself as like an upper class woman wasn't great. I mean, Adelaide can do it. She is a policewoman. She says she can handle herself, but the fact that Doyle is worried about her in this episode shows that there is a concern for women walking alone. There's still a concern for women walking alone at night, just in general, but in the Victorian period, it would have been slightly unseemly for it's not Victorian, it's 1901. But while the Jack the Ripper, Spring Heel Jack stuff was going on, women would normally be escorted, or they'd at least, like, you'd know where they were going if they were upper class. Lower class women often had a bit more freedom because some of them had jobs, some of them were taking care of families, their husbands were gone, their male companions were gone. There was a lot more like women are around men, or at least aren't by themselves very frequently. So there is a little bit of a connection. I'm secretly hoping, not so secretly, that Jack the Ripper does make a bit of an appearance in Houdini and Doyle. I don't know if he will or not. The show Ripper Street exists, and that's a lot, like, that was a lot about Jack the Ripper. There's a lot of mention to Jack the Ripper for a little bit. There are other cases, but I don't know if Houdini and Doyle will hit on it as much, especially since they did a Spring Heel Jack episode. But we did see I think it's I don't know. I said Illuminati, I was tweeting, and I was like, Mason's Illuminati? It's the pyramid with the eye, which appears on, it appears in a lot of things, but in From Hell, the movie, and the comic book, there is a reference to Jack the Ripper being connected to the Masons, and like secret underground groups in London. So, maybe it's possible. Fingers crossed we get Jack the Ripper. I'm a huge Jack the Ripper fan. Not like, I'm not like creepy fan. I just like reading about Jack the Ripper. I have a Jack the Ripper casebook that talks about Jack the Ripper, because I studied Victorian crime stuff. He comes up a lot. He's kind of a big deal, especially since he was an unsolved case. Much like, there were arrests for Spring Heel Jack, but they didn't really go anywhere. Very similarly, where in Jack the Ripper, they arrested a lot of people, they questioned a lot of people, but they couldn't ever really get any charges to stick. So while there are still theories about who Jack the Ripper could be. People have done DNA tests, they've attempted to reconstruct everything that happened, but not so much for Spring Heel Jack. But I thought that it would be interesting to discuss the history of Spring Heel Jack with you, since Doyle didn't really get a huge chance to, even though he gave you his own little brief version in the episode. So, if you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more of me, please subscribe. You can find me on Twitter at Kleffnotes, on my blog, kleffnotes.wordpress.com. I write for the Nerdy Girl Express, nerdygirlexpress.com. I run their Snapchat, the Nerdy Girl EXP. And I post recipes on the iZombie Sport Group site, iZombiesportgroup.com. Bye, guys.